It started on a cold February night in a quiet suburb of upstate New York. I lived alone in a small, one-bedroom apartment nestled above a hardware store. It wasn't glamorous, but it was cozy and affordable, perfect for someone just starting their career. The winters were harsh, but I liked the stillness of the snow-covered streets, the way everything felt muted after dark. That night, I had gone to bed early, drained from a long day at work. My phone rested on the nightstand, plugged into the outlet near the headboard. I used it as my alarm clock, a habit I'd kept since college. The faint glow of the charging screen was the last thing I saw before I drifted off to sleep. I woke suddenly, disoriented. The room was pitch dark, and for a moment, I wasn't sure what had woken me. Then I heard it, the shrill, insistent blare of my phone's alarm. I groaned, reaching for it, but when I glanced at the time, confusion set in. It was 2:17 a.m., hours before my usual wake-up time. I squinted at the screen. The alarm was labeled down. I didn't remember setting that alarm. In fact, I was certain I hadn't. My alarms were always labeled with practical names like work or gym. I swiped it off and set the phone back down, chalking it up to a glitch or some mistake I'd made while half asleep. Within minutes, I was drifting back to sleep. The next night, it happened again. This time, the alarm jolted me awake at 3:05 a.m. The label read beneath. My stomach tightened as I stared at the screen. This wasn't a glitch. Someone had set this alarm, but how? My phone was password protected, and I lived alone. Trying to rationalize it, I convinced myself I must have accidentally set it, though the explanation felt hollow. The third night, I decided to be proactive. Before bed, I checked my alarms meticulously, deleting any extras and setting a new, secure password for my phone. I wrote the password down on a sticky note and tucked it into my bedside drawer, feeling confident I'd put the issue to rest. I was wrong. At exactly 1:45 a.m., the alarm went off again. This time, the label was simply "the." My blood ran cold. I turned off the alarm and checked my phone. The new password was still in place, but somehow the alarm had been added. A deep unease settled over me as I realized someone, or something, was tampering with my phone. I left the phone off for the rest of the night, unwilling to deal with whatever was happening. The next morning, I woke to a new realization. The sticky note with my password was missing. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Had I misplaced it? Dropped it? Or had someone been in my apartment? I called my landlord, asking if anyone had access to my place. He assured me the locks hadn't been changed and no one had entered. It didn't make me feel better. That night, I left my phone off completely and set an old-fashioned alarm clock instead. At 12:30 a.m., I woke to a sound that made my skin crawl, the same alarm tone blaring from my phone. I turned on the light and grabbed the device, which was now lying on the floor, though I'd left it on the nightstand. The screen displayed a new alarm, labeled bed. My hands shook as I stared at it. The phone was powered on, even though I'd turned it off. I turned the phone over in my hands, trying to find any rational explanation, but my thoughts were interrupted by another noise, a faint scraping sound coming from the direction of my bed. Slowly, I looked down. My charger, which had been plugged into the outlet beneath the bed, was gone. The cord dangled loosely over the edge, as if it had been yanked free. I leaned down cautiously, peering into the dark space beneath the bed. The scraping noise grew louder, more deliberate. Then, out of the darkness, a hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. I screamed, pulling back with all my strength as the hand tightened its grip. It was cold, rough, and impossibly strong. My free hand fumbled for the lamp on the nightstand, knocking it over in the process. I managed to grab it and swing it downward, smashing it against the edge of the bed frame. The impact was enough to loosen the grip, and I stumbled backward, gasping for air. The hand retreated, disappearing into the shadows beneath the bed. I grabbed my phone and bolted for the door, slamming it shut behind me. My heart was racing as I dialed 911, barely able to get the words out. The dispatcher kept me on the line until the police arrived. When the officers searched the apartment, they found no one. The space beneath the bed was empty, and there were no signs of forced entry. The only thing they found was the missing sticky note, crumpled and stuffed into the gap between the wall and the bed frame. The lead officer suggested it might have been a prank or a break-in, though he admitted it was strange there was no evidence of entry. They recommended I stay somewhere else for the night, which I did. I packed a bag and drove to a friend's house, unable to shake the feeling that I was being followed. The next morning, I returned to the apartment to gather more of my things. As I stepped inside, a chill ran down my spine. The air felt heavy, oppressive. On the kitchen counter, my phone sat in the exact spot where I had left it, but the screen was on. A new alarm had been set. The time was blank, but the label sent a fresh wave of terror through me. Still here. It had been a few days since I last heard from my friend Dylan. We usually texted or hung out daily, but this week, his silence was noticeable. At first, I chalked it up to him being busy. He worked odd jobs and sometimes disappeared for a day or two, but by the third day, I started to worry. I texted him several times and even called, but there was no response. His voicemail was full, and every unanswered call deepened my unease. Dylan lived a few blocks away in a small duplex. I decided to check on him, walking over just as the sun dipped below the horizon. His car was parked in the driveway, but the house was dark. I knocked on the door, rang the bell, and even called his name through the mail slot, but there was no answer. The silence was suffocating. I left, hoping he'd just gone out for a walk or was asleep inside. That night, my phone buzzed with an incoming FaceTime call from an unknown number. I hesitated before answering, my screen showing nothing but darkness. "Hello?" I said, my voice uncertain. The camera shifted, and suddenly Dylan's face appeared on the screen. Relief flooded through me. "Dylan, where the hell have you been?" I asked. He didn't respond right away. Something was off. His face looked pale, almost ghostly, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He seemed fidgety, his gaze darting around nervously. "Are you okay?" I pressed, my concern growing. "I'm fine," he said, his voice flat. "I'm at home." It didn't make sense. I had just been at his house, and it had been dark and silent. "Whose phone is this? Why haven't you answered me?" I asked. There was a long pause. He stared into the camera, his expression unreadable. "I need your help," he finally said. "Can you lend me $10,000? The request hit me like a punch to the gut. $10,000? "Dylan, what the hell are you talking about? Are you in trouble?" Another pause, longer this time. His left eye twitched slightly, and for a moment, it looked like he was trying to tell me something without speaking. Then he said, "I'll pay you back, I promise." "What's going on?" I demanded. "You look awful. Tell me where you are." "I told you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm home." The call ended abruptly, leaving me staring at my reflection in the black screen. I felt sick. Something was very wrong. I tried calling the number back, but it went straight to voicemail. My gut told me Dylan was in danger, and I couldn't just let it go. The next morning, I went back to his house. The car was still there, but once again, no one answered the door. I knocked louder, my fist banging against the wood, but it was like the house had swallowed him whole. Defeated, I went home, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something critical. That night, at almost the exact same time, my phone buzzed with another FaceTime call. It was the same unknown number. My hand trembled as I answered, the screen showing Dylan again. This time, he looked worse. His face was bruised, and there was a small cut on his forehead. His shirt was stained with something dark, and he kept glancing over his shoulder. "Dylan, what's going on? Tell me where you are," I pleaded. "I need the money," he said, his voice shaky. "Please." "I'm running out of time." I stared at him, my mind racing. Running out of time for what? "Who's with you? Are you being threatened?" He didn't answer. Instead, he whispered, Don't point it at me." His eyes darted to something off screen, and I noticed the faintest twitch of his lips, almost like he was trying to give me a signal. Then the call ended again. My heart pounded as I sat in silence, piecing together the clues. Dylan's words, his bruised face, the way he kept glancing off screen, It was clear he wasn't alone, and whoever was with him was dangerous. By some miracle, I remembered the caller ID's location from the first call. I looked up the area and found it was a rundown neighborhood on the outskirts of town. I debated calling the police immediately, but I didn't know what I'd tell them. Instead, I grabbed my car keys and drove to the address I'd found. The neighborhood was eerily quiet, the kind of place where every window seemed to have blinds drawn tight. My headlights illuminated an abandoned-looking house with peeling paint and a sagging porch. It matched the location on my phone. I parked a few houses down and called 911, my voice trembling as I explained the situation. They told me to stay put and wait for officers to arrive. Minutes felt like hours as I sat in the car, my eyes glued to the house. Finally, 2 squad cars pulled up, their lights off. The officers moved silently toward the building, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. I stayed in the car, holding my breath. Suddenly, the front door burst open, and a man bolted out, disappearing into the night. One of the officers chased after him while the others went inside. Moments later, they emerged, supporting Dylan between them. He looked battered but alive. They found him tied up in the basement. The man who escaped had been holding him hostage, using his phone to demand money from his contacts. Dylan had been beaten and starved for days, but had managed to give me subtle hints during the calls. The officers told me my quick thinking likely saved his life. Dylan didn't talk about what had happened for a long time. When he finally did, he told me the man had jumped him while he was walking home one night, forcing him into a car at gunpoint. The rest was a blur of fear and pain. Even now, he struggles with the memories. I deleted the unknown number from my phone, but I can't delete the image of Dylan's bruised face staring back at me through the screen. Every time my phone buzzes with an unfamiliar call, my heart skips a beat, and I wonder, what if it happens again? What if the next call isn't someone I can save? The night was bitterly cold, the kind of chill that seeps through the walls no matter how well insulated your house is. I was living alone in a small house on the edge of a rural town in Minnesota, surrounded by flat, open fields that stretched endlessly into the horizon. It was peaceful usually, but that night, the silence felt oppressive. I had just finished watching a movie and was settling into bed. The house was dark except for the soft glow of the nightlight in the hallway. I locked the doors, as I always did, and double-checked the windows before turning in. Living alone had made me cautious, even a little paranoid. I drifted off quickly, the quiet hum of the heater lulling me to sleep. But something woke me in the early hours of the morning. A faint noise, almost imperceptible. At first, I thought it was the wind rattling the windows, but then I heard it again. A soft creak, like someone stepping on the hardwood floor just outside my bedroom. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I strained to listen, but the house had fallen silent again. Telling myself it was just the house settling, I rolled over and closed my eyes, but the uneasy feeling lingered. A sudden thud from the living room made me sit bolt upright. It was unmistakable this time. Someone was inside. My hands shook as I reached for my phone, dialing 911. The operator's voice was calm as she assured me that officers were on their way, but my fear was all-consuming. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept by my bed and crept toward the door, my footsteps silent on the carpet. The living room was shrouded in darkness, the faint moonlight streaming through the curtains casting eerie shadows across the furniture. At first, I saw nothing out of place. Then my eyes landed on the front door. It was wide open, the cold night air pouring in. I froze, the bat held tightly in my hands. My mind raced. Had I forgotten to lock it? No, I was certain I had. Whoever had opened it was still inside. I took a step forward, my breath shallow. That's when I saw him. A man, crouched behind the couch. His face was obscured by a hood, but his posture was tense, like a predator ready to pounce. He hadn't noticed me yet. My grip tightened on the bat as I debated my next move. Before I could act, he stood, his head tilting slightly as if he'd sensed me. The light from the street lamp outside caught his face, and I saw his expression. Calm, almost curious. It was the kind of look that made your stomach churn because it was utterly devoid of fear or guilt. "What do you want?" I managed to choke out, my voice trembling. He didn't answer. Instead, he took a step toward me, his movements slow and deliberate. I backed up, keeping the bat raised, but my hands were slick with sweat, and I wasn't sure I'd have the strength to use it. "Get out," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. He stopped, his head cocked as if considering my words. Then, without warning, he lunged. I swung the bat, the impact reverberating up my arms as it connected with his shoulder. He stumbled but didn't go down. Instead, he let out a low, guttural laugh, the sound chilling in the stillness of the house. I turned and ran, heading for the kitchen. My plan was to grab a knife and lock myself in the pantry until the police arrived, but as I reached the doorway, I felt a hand grab the back of my shirt. I twisted, swinging the bat blindly, and managed to break free. I bolted down the hallway, slamming the bedroom door shut behind me and shoving the dresser against it. My chest heaved as I gasped for air, my ears straining for any sound on the other side. For a moment, there was nothing. Then came the footsteps, slow and deliberate, followed by the doorknob rattling. I pressed myself against the wall, the bat still in my hands, as the door shook under the weight of his efforts. My mind raced with images of what would happen if he got through. Then, suddenly, the rattling stopped. The silence was deafening. I didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe, as I waited for him to try again. Minutes passed, but there was nothing. Finally, I heard it, the faint wail of sirens in the distance. Relief washed over me as I realized the police were close. The sound must have scared him because I heard his footsteps retreating, followed by the front door slamming shut. I stayed where I was until I heard the knock on the door, accompanied by a voice announcing, "Police!" When I finally opened the door, my knees nearly gave out. The officers searched the house and the surrounding area, but found no sign of the man. They assured me he was likely gone, a drifter looking for an easy target, but their words did little to calm my nerves. The next day, I had the locks changed and installed a security system. I moved out a month later, unable to shake the memory of his laugh or the way he had stared at me as if I were nothing more than a game. Even now, in a new home miles away, I keep a bat by my bed and double-check the locks every night. But the worst part, sometimes in the quiet moments just before sleep, I can still hear the sound of his laughter echoing in the dark.